Benson anymore, and about these secret combinations and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And we talked, and we're like, there's that scripture that's used in the discussions. It says, the prophets hath he hidden, and the seers hath he covered. And so we thought, oh well, maybe because of the wickedness of the people, God isn't like showing the current prophet how these secret combinations are running the government and stuff, like the Book of Mormon predicted would happen.
I'm gonna stop you right there.
That's using NLP to sell people on mass murder to support the Illuminati. I'm like, there's just no way that this is right.
There's no way. I'm going to stop you right there because I started recording. You were saying some really good stuff. I want to welcome our audience members today. Dodger Game is back. We're going to pick up where we left off. This is Galactic Storyteller here for part 2 of my chit chat with Dodger Game. We are going to be talking about his awakening experience, all of the inconsistencies that he noticed scripturally, and what was going on within the church at the time of his awakening and what led him out. So everybody, help me welcome back Dodger. Dave, I want you to pick up where you left off. Keep on going.
All right. Let me check and make sure my volume's turned up all the way here.
That sounds good.
Okay, yeah. Well, I mean, for me to hear you, because I was struggling a little bit.
Okay.
Yeah. So can you see all my good cedar stone stuff here, or do I have to angle it a little bit?
No, it's awesome. I love your stones. Do I see some selenite?
Yeah, there's an additional 13 stones besides these 2 cedar stones and these crystal ball cedar stones. And this one's just kind of there. I don't know why.
Perfect.
And then I got some guitar picks. So, yeah,
I love that you're not afraid to be eccentric. You are who you are. So by all means, take it away.
Oh, they're just kind of props. But, one of the things, so I just started noticing a lot of things, as we were kind of talking about how I noticed that things weren't the way I was taught or believed.
Mm-hmm.
I had studied a lot. I don't know if I mentioned I worked for the church.
No, you didn't.
Yeah, okay, well maybe that's a good place to pick up, because basically after I thought I was a wayward son, basically, when I started doing things where I was breaking the word of wisdom, I saw mild drinks of barley, was recommended, and I knew that was beer. I got a little too intoxicated, and then I said, "What the heck? I'm a sinner." Drank some whiskey that was in the cupboard waiting for my uncle. Why my mom would leave that there when we were turning Mormon, I don't know. It was there for Uncle Bill, right? And next thing you know, I was smoking pot, and then I thought I was just, a lost soul. So I refused becoming a priest, and I turned 16, and the bishop said, "Hey, let's have an interview." And I'm like, I'm not feeling good about moving up here, because I didn't want to be one of those guys that I knew was like, getting loaded Saturday night and blessing the sacrament on Sunday, because I totally believed, right? But I thought, I've turned into a sinner, right? And I just didn't feel like there was a way back right away.
Oh.
So I think I mentioned that basically in the process of when that voice spoke to me, when my future wife stepped onto that bus at college and said, "If you keep my commandments, she's yours." And then she appeared at the door with her friend, her friend was interested in me. And I was living with Freemasons, and all of them, everybody was associated with Freemasons. All their dads were Master Masons and that kind of stuff. We mentioned that. So I felt like I had to, I needed to play catch up, because I hadn't gone on a full-time mission, and I had really, I felt like I'd really sinned during, a period of about 2.5 years, right? So I kind of miraculously got this job that was, enough to get married on, and that sort of a thing. I'm not going to really go into that. But what happened there was that there were breaks. It was union. I got breaks like every 2 hours, right? And so everybody would be like, wasting their time and carousing and stuff. And I was reading the teachings of the prophet Joseph Smith, Discourses of Brigham Young, Miracle of Forgiveness, Marvelous Work and a Wonder. I was just graciously reading stuff on breaks and lunchtime. And, people would kind of take exception to what I was doing, because there was a lot of really bad atmosphere there as far as, it was very different from what I was trying to do. Well, let's just say that, right?
Sure.
And there was a lot of dishonesty involved, and they came to a point where I just couldn't work there anymore. And so I kind of took a leap of faith and quit working there. And I did some other stuff, and eventually, not very long thereafter, a couple of things happened. Maybe I won't get into one. I got hired by a Mormon guy to work where a bunch of Mormons were working at a night job. And then I got called on a stake mission, and I got hired by the church. And because I got hired by the church, I had access to all these cassette tapes. And so I bought myself a cassette recorder that I could put on my belt. And I mean, all day when I was working, or much of the day, I was listening to general conference talks or other BYU devotionals or stuff like QB Brown talking, the profile of a prophet. I mean, I tried to learn as much as I could, the scriptures on tape, all that kind of stuff. And at the same time, right about then, I also was asked to run a church bookstore, and as a calling. And so I just, I got to buy stuff wholesale for myself, they said. And I read and I read and I read. And so I was pretty deeply, I educated myself as much as I could.
So your calling was to run the bookstore. Were you paid for that?
No, it was a calling. And the bookstore was for the elders quorum to raise funds for whatever elders quorum activities you would have,
Okay.
Whatever they would be, parties, whatever it was. And so I was bringing in revenue by selling books. I could buy wholesale. They had everything set up, and I ran it out of our house. So people would have to call and say, "Hey, we'd like to come over and look at your books."
Okay.
Yeah.
So you had access to a lot of church doctrine, church information, and you were reading it.
Exactly. Okay. And I got the inspired version of the Bible from the reorganized church, so that I could read, beyond, Genesis chapter 8. And I studied a lot of stuff, and I get books on Joseph Smith and his journal, his diary, all this kind of stuff. And so I just started having these things come up, one thing I remember actually wasn't even from one of my books. I read the book of, I didn't read the book of Enoch, but I read the book of Jasher. I read all kinds of stuff. And because of my background, with the John Birch Society and me delving deeper into learning more about, secretive or secret societies, because of what was in Ether chapter 8 and in Moses chapter 5 in LDS scripture, I didn't see these guys as just innocuous, clubs. I was, becoming more and more aware of their occult nature and, Luciferian religion. And I read a book called Proofs of Conspiracy by John Robinson, something like that, written like in the late 1700s about the Illuminati. And so I went much deeper into that sort of thing than most people did, that were just taught, the manifest destiny of America goes just along exactly with what Mormonism teaches. Like, God set up this nation so that, the gospel could be restored where there was religious freedom. And, the Book of Mormon says, the American Indians, the Lamanites, God had this wrath on them, to justify massacring them and having 90% of them wiped out in many cases, between smallpox and the bounties on their heads. so many, all these, Thanksgivings were declared all over the place by governors whenever they slaughtered the Indians. I think Lincoln was the one who created a national holiday on a specific date to kind of consolidate all these other Thanksgivings, because there was bounties on their heads. And it's like, they're the promised people, they're the seed of Israel, but we'll just wipe out about 90% of them in the meantime, who had nothing to do with whatever happened to the Nephites. And I'm like, that doesn't really seem right, and so I started to notice that things weren't really matching up quite right. More about American history, and like with Joseph Smith, I remember I noticed how things, sometimes things just look a little bit too coincidental and familiar. One of the, and I remember I talked about, he just comes up with putting the Masonic stuff in 7 weeks after he becomes a Master Mason. I'm going, yeah, right. That was, that's a little bit too much coincidence. I was in priest meeting one time, and this guy had his book, this Joseph Smith book that I didn't have, and I just looked up Masonry in the index really quick, and priested, and there was one note, and it said, Brother Brigham and I attended a Masonic temple dedication today. And I was like, Masonic temple dedication. Why does that sound just too familiar? Temple dedication, Yeah, and I was just like, wait a minute, which came first, the chicken or the egg, right? And like I mentioned, that moment I had when I was in the temple after, well after the 1990 thing, and a voice spoke to me and said, Google the 5 points of fellowship. 5 points of fellowship used to be in the endowment, pre-1990, right? Upon which you said things, through the veil to the person who was supposed to represent the Lord. And so when I got home, I Googled it, or I looked it up on some, I hate saying Googled it. It's like, but I did. And it was all about the legend of Hiram Abiff in Freemasonry. It never mentioned Mormonism at all. And I was like, wait a minute, and all these things started waking me up to the fact that, and then I walked in, I used to go with my wife then to like Barnes and Noble with, we had a little boy. We had both come into a second marriage and brought children with us. And we had a little boy. And we take him to like Barnes and Noble, and she'd, play with the little trains with him sometimes for a while. I kind of wandered around, and then we'd all play together and stuff. But I had this feeling, I was looking at this book rack, and I saw all these pictures of like, some occult symbols and stuff. And I saw pictures of George Bush Sr. and Bill Clinton. And anyway, it was a book called The Greatest Secret by David Icke. And, I started reading things there. And in fact, he mentioned, whatever, I forget, the girl with the Transformation of America and stuff.
Oh, Kathy O'Brien.
Yeah. And he also mentioned the fact that within Freemasonry there, like in London or something, and he wasn't talking at all about Mormonism at this point. And he said in 1986 that they had the Lord, what's his name, whoever, right, who was the head of like the Scottish Rite, or probably the Scottish Rite. He got rid of those penalties. And I go, oh, so Gordon B. Hinckley just waited 4 years to do the same thing, And I'm like, so he didn't want to look like he was just following suit, but it's too much of a coincidence. After like hundreds of years, they dropped those things out of the Blue Lodge there. And then the head of the LDS Church does the same thing. And then I saw this, what really got me, I don't know if you have this recording, was when Gordon B. Hinckley came out and he made a couple of speeches right after 9/11. And I noticed him using neurolinguistic programming and hypnotic language and some sales techniques whereby he associated the Iraqi people and the Afghan people with the Gadianton robbers. And then associated the American people with the Nephites and said, and then he read like what's on the title of Liberty of Moroni, and basically said that we were fighting for our wives and our children, our freedom, our religion, yea, our all, and we were justified. And I thought, wait a minute, those people didn't do anything to us, you know? The only people even the official story was talking trash about were Saudis. I mean, this guy's BSing, and he said, you know, if you're in the military, God won't hold you responsible for going over and being in this war and killing all these people. And that's
saying, a lie. That's a lie, by the way. So
I saw him lying. I saw him. He used like a 180 turnaround sales technique, you know, and this association business, and he made it look like everything that was opposite of what it was. And he said, you know, the Lord rules in the armies of the nations. And then he said, Jesus, then he goes, but we worship the Lord Jesus Christ, the Prince of Peace. And he's using like hypnotic cadence and calming and slowing down. And then he goes, but even he said, come not to bring peace, but with a sword. And so he's using these conflicting things, which also supported the war, plus confused the mind. So that you get to the point where you go, what can I believe? Well, I just have to follow the prophet. You know, that's what they always do. You can't decide on your own. You just need to follow the prophet, you know, for confirmation, that kind of a thing. And I'm like, this guy's lying through his teeth, and he's saying our leaders have got more wisdom than we do, which were basically, you know, Dick Cheney and George Bush and you know, Rumsfeld,
right.
Yeah. And I'm like, no, these guys are all totally evil. And he's telling us to just trust them. We won't be accountable. We're obligated, if we're in the armed forces, to do this, even if we don't feel good about it. And then he's like, but we don't hold anything against our Muslim brethren. You know, basically like, let's just love them as we bomb the shit out of them. And I'm like, wait a minute, this guy's just promoting mass murder. There's no way he's guided by some good, loving God, and he's using advanced sales techniques. And you know what? He knows what the hell he's doing. The guy understands neurolinguistic programming and hypnotic language. He's a freaking pro, just like Monson and Dieter Uchtdorf. And I'm like, these guys are professionals. How are they all professionals? You know? And if you look at like Dieter Uchtdorf's like resume, you'll see like when he's with Lufthansa, they send him to this special like school in Switzerland. And if you look at who goes there, well, it's like a who's who of the Bilderbergers, you know? You're like, so this is where he got like some extra training to be, you know, because he's really good. He's super smooth. And a lot of the ex-Mormon community think, oh, he's just a liberal guy and he's more loving and kind and you know.
He's a wolf in sheep's clothing, and people need
Bednar.
He's a wolf in sheep's clothing, and people need to learn how to use discernment. They think they need some Holy Ghost or entity to tell them that, but they have that radar within themselves, and they should be honing that barometer so they can spot the bullshit even when it has a beautiful veneer and it sounds good. And the Mormon culture is not trained to do that because they're trained to abdicate their spiritual well-being over to these brethren, these righteous brethren. So whatever they say should be accepted. And if you don't accept it, you're showing lack of faith. So I have an exception with that because these are professionals.
I agree with you. And because of the fact that, you know, I was always into self-improvement, you know, self-help psychology. From the time I was a kid, I was reading stuff like Psycho-Cybernetics, and I told you I went through like Silver Mind Control, did all these things where we did all kinds of, you know, stuff that was pretty, you know, intense, remote viewing, all kinds of self-hypnosis, all these things. And I you know, I did Tony Robbins stuff, and I knew I'm no master.
There's another charlatan. Don't get me started on that.
Huh?
I said, there's another charlatan. Don't get me started on that.
Right, that's true. I mean, and it's not like he invents any of this stuff, but he does like what Joseph Smith did. He takes stuff that's already out there and he puts a little twist on it, markets it, and makes, you know, he does well for himself. And he teaches techniques that are pretty effective. And I recognized enough I knew enough through what I had, taught myself, that these guys were professionals, and that all these guys were, they knew what the hell they were doing as far as using. I was like, what were the chances all these apostles and then all these other evangelists and stuff are, they just happen to know, NLP techniques and hypnotic, cadence and language and all these things. And I'm like, no, this is just not okay. And then, I just started noticing things. And when we went to Central America to live, because did I talk about this at all last week? Or was that somebody else I was talking to?
No, you did talk a little bit about living in Central America.
Okay, yeah. So what I didn't say is that I was just, sometimes some of the, you see more and more things, symbols in America, but I was seeing stuff, especially like in Panama City. Mm-hmm. I had some really interesting experiences down, in Panama. But I saw, there's like pyramids on all these buildings and stuff. And me and my wife went to this place near a valley that's kind of known for being old money. And I had this like kind of spiritual experience there about what was really there. But we went to this other place, and it was a new development, and it was on Beltane, May 1st.
Yep.
We went there, and there's like nobody there except for one guy.
Okay, hold on. Just for the viewers, Beltane is one of the eight high holidays for satanic rituals. It is May 1st, and they call that Beltane. So that's what he's referring to. Okay, go ahead.
Right. And so in America, that's called like May Day, which is basically a celebration of the Bolshevik Revolution and the Soviets taking over Russia. Mm-hmm. But in much of the world, it's celebrated Labor Day. Mm-hmm. And it's all, and so so we were like looking at this, what they were doing is like, they had all these lots, and you could like build your own house and do whatever you wanted to do. And we're talking to this guy who was like the realtor he was like the head dude for as far as real estate sales go there. And we're talking to him, and he goes, yeah, well, like not many people are here because it's a holiday. And I go, really? So that's odd. I go, so Labor Day, I didn't know that was celebrated on May 1st here. I go, the birthday of the Illuminati, right? And he goes, well, didn't you notice that you had to go through a pyramid to get here? He goes, to get through it, the gate? And I said, actually, I did, because basically the gate was an obelisk, with a pyramid, full pyramid on the top. And he goes, actually, everybody here is a Freemason that works here. He goes, but I'm kind of like an undercover Christian, And he started telling us all this stuff. And I was like, and he talked about how the guy, had moved these funds from one Mason bank to another Mason bank, and that he had to do something with it or he would lose the money. So he started this development. Mm-hmm. And it was like, he just started talking, like, telling me all this stuff. I was like, wow, and all these parks we'd go to. And I remember this one particular park, and we had another child down there. We moved to this other city far away because we found a midwife there. And we were standing in this park, and I noticed that there was this obelisk, and it had like an arm to the square, and it was facing a dome, the female representation, and the dome looked just like that dome that you see in the temple movie where like Elohim and Jehovah, walk out of. And the dome looked just like that. And that was exactly due north of the obelisk. I kept saying all this Masonic stuff. And of course, they had and right next to the Masonic temple, like on 13th Street or whatever, is the Lawyers Guild. And then they had the Catholic Church and all stuff around the park a couple blocks away. And I was like seeing all this stuff. And they had all the, they had other, all sorts of stuff that I started recognizing. Mm-hmm. And I was, my gosh, they flaunted it so heavily down there. And I began noticing things. And then I remember I was reading, and I was talking to this high council guy in Spanish, and I was telling him, you know what? If you look at that story in 3rd Nephi, where it says, and Jesus came down and all that business, And then it says he came down, and then they'd already been doing these activities, and then it sounds like it takes about 40 minutes for various things, maybe. I mean, because of this activity, and then we did this and this. So he comes down and he like heals everybody, and then he casts the devils out of all the people that have demons, right? And then he's like, he's like the celestial X-lax. He's like, my bowels are moved with compassion. And he goes, I'm going to bless all your children. So it says he gave one by one individual, like the blessing, like you do in sacrament meeting, right? Mm-hmm. Children. He said he took them individually in his arms and gave them and blessed each child individually. Okay. And it said it had already said that these were the children of 2,000 men plus their wives and their children. And I started thinking, okay, like if you got like 50 guys in priesthood, between all the quorums, don't you at least have 25 kids in junior primary? I'm like, so are we talking 1,000 kids? Let's cut that in half and say 500 or 480. That's one every minute, including handing them off for 16 straight hours. Like, you know what? This shit never happened. It was mathematically impossible.
Right.
It wasn't even close. You cut the numbers in half and half and half and half, and like 1 minute blessings, including handing them off, and like these little kids are like standing there, It's
a line like this.
Yeah, exactly. I go, and it sounded like it took like about half an hour. It's like, so he's doing these blessings in like 5 seconds. He took them individually, one by one. He laid out way too many facts, and you just like, this is mathematically impossible.
Right.
This shit never happened. And then I just started seeing thing after thing, all these conflicts and contradictions, like 3rd Nephi, and I mean Ether chapter 3, and the brother of Jared's there with his special stones, right? And then he's got one special stone and all this stuff, and then for it to be a seer stone at the end of the chapter. But it says that the Lord appeared to him and told him in verse 9 that no one ever had enough faith to see him. He was the first guy. And in 15, he says it again, basically. He goes, you're the man. I've never seen you. The reason, and so between 9 and 15, he says, no one's ever seen me because no one's ever had enough faith. And he said, and the brother of Jared was, so awesome that he moved mountains and he moved rivers and all this stuff. And then you look in the book of Moses, chapter 7, and that's like 1,100 years before. It's before the flood story, and the other one's like after the flood, right? And Enoch was doing the same damn thing, and it says, and the Lord spoke to him face to face, as one man speaketh with another, and he moved mountains and rivers and all this shit. And I go, hello, Joe, you screwed up again, And over and over and over, I'd see all these contradictions, Section 76, it was like, that Jesus created all these planets and shit. And it says, and it said, but Jesus was the only begotten of the Father, and that and by him and through him the worlds are and created, and the inhabitants thereof are begotten sons and daughters unto God. And I'm going, this is the verse before they just said he's the only begotten, now everybody's begotten, And I'm like, one after another, the temple they built. They had all these precious things. In the next verse, that's like 2 Nephi chapter 5, verses 15 and 16 or something. And then the next verse, it's like, but it was like the temple of Solomon, except for the fact that we didn't have any precious things. And I'm like, dude, you left him in the last verse. What is your problem? And there's one after another, I saw all these contradictions, and I saw that the president of the church lying and saying stuff so that we could murder people and talk about his buddies. And then I saw the handshake between Gordy and Dick Cheney and the one between George Bush and Monson, and they're both doing the grip of the master mason that we know as something else in the temple. And I'm like, oh, so are these guys like secret Mormons, and they're doing like the grip like in front of people on BYU TV? What's up with that shit,
I've shown pictures of that on a couple, I think on one of my videos, at least one, but I have to tell you, first time, I've only been in a Masonic temple one time, and that's because a friend of mine, her husband was a Mason, and he died. And so the Masons were holding a funeral for him at the lodge. So when I went, I was really shocked because they were doing the handshake, the second token, and all these different, the claw grip and all of that. And that just kind of blew my paradigm, because in my world, that was solely for the temple. And now here I'm seeing it in a Masonic lodge with every single brethren.
Yeah.
So that was a paradigm shifter for me. So go ahead.
Yeah, and then you see LDS presidents of the church, you know, the president and essentially the vice president of LDS Inc., you know, doing this out in the open with these other guys, so they all know the same thing. So you're like, okay, they just proved that they're Freemasons, you know,
right?
And they're supporting, you know, this so-called preemptive war. You know what the Book of Mormon says? It says that, you know, the Gadianton robbers were about to come down and like waste the guys before Jesus is supposed to come. And then some people were saying, hey, let's go waste them in their strongholds up there in the hills. And then Gidgidonai, who was like the general of all the Nephites, and he's like super righteous man, because the Nephites always chose righteous guys. He's like, no, if we go after them, the Lord will deliver us into their hands. We have to wait and let them make war on us. And I'm like, but you're okay with a preemptive war and say follow Dick Cheney and murder all these innocent people and nothing to do with this? It's like contradiction after contradiction. When I did a video kind of picking apart Gordon B. Hinckley's speeches there and showing, you know, here's how he's pulling this bullshit over us. And I'm like, there's no way, you know? And then, like I said, after that, it was thing after thing. I saw Joseph Smith's, you know, all his taking other dudes' wives, and like Henry Jacobs, you know, he like borrowed her, like sharecropped her, and then Brigham takes his wife and family away. And she goes, she's my property, and I'm proxy for Joseph Smith. And you know, basically Henry Jacobs stood as a witness while his wife was sealed for all eternity to Joseph Smith. And that happened to about 10 other guys that we know of. So LDS doctrine is that Joseph Smith stole their wives for all eternity, and they're like supposed to like go out and find somebody new. And I'm like, wait a minute, I thought it was whole families are supposed to be together forever. And then Brigham tells Jacobs, he goes, go out and find you a new wife, but this time make sure she's not someone else's soulmate. I go, what? And that guy's life was just wrecked, you know. And I'm just, I just said, this is really wrong. This is so wrong. Then I read like what Joseph Jackson, you know, who actually wasn't Mormon, but they mention him. But he was a confidant of Joseph Smith, hired to murder the governor and also bust out Porter Rockwell, who was being held because of the assassination. He hit, you know, the governor with 3 shots, but he didn't kill him. And so he was supposed to bust him loose. And so you read all about the stuff with the Danites, and the main thing I was going to mention is the spiritual wife system. You know, they had like maybe minimum 600 girls in the spiritual wife system. And the LDS Church so controls that argument that they try and, you know, avoid, they don't talk about the spiritual wife system at all. And so supposedly Joseph Smith bragged he did like 400 girls. I mean, I'm like, hey, that's not Kobe, that's not Wilt Chamberlain, but that's a lot. And it's not being mentioned, you know. It's not being mentioned, and they steer the argument to like Brian Hale saying stuff like, well, you can't prove Joseph Smith was having sex with these 34 women or so. You can't prove it. Or especially with the 12 that were other dudes' wives. And they just steer the thing, but they don't talk about the fact that he was breaking his covenants that he made with Emma, and there was a legally binding contract, and the terms of that contract included, you know, a mutually exclusive marital relationship. And so it's like the excuse is God just told him, who gives a shit? She's just a woman. Go ahead and here's what I want you to do. But those were the terms that she agreed upon, you know, to be his wife when they went before the justice of the peace, when they eloped, you know, her dad wasn't into it. And so he was breaking supposedly the most sacred covenants that you've got. And then, you know, the articles of faith say, we believe in being honest, true, chaste, and benevolent. And I'm like, he's none of those things.
Okay, so have you listened to any of my interviews with John Bystrom?
Yeah, I listened
Okay.
to. I think it was #1. We listened to that right before our first interview. Plus, I read John's,
Okay.
written stuff. Maybe I don't know 8-9 months ago. That sort of thing. I just made a little comment on the video to John, saying, and saying, why don't you put the link here for your stuff, because I read it and it was really interesting. It was talking about
Yeah, and
those guys.
because of my friendship with John now and the information he's brought forward, I've looked into a couple of resources that have exonerated Joseph as a polygamist and a polyandrist. I don't give him slack on anything else, but at least as far as that's concerned, I am more inclined at this point to believe that under direction of Brigham Young, Willard Richards altered those records to make it appear as though he was a polygamist, because that's what they were doing. Brigham, he was instituting the Cochranite sexual rituals within his sphere, eliminate Joseph, and then he stepped into a place of power. So that's where I'm at with that as far as Joseph is concerned with polygamy. What are your thoughts on that?
I don't believe Joseph Smith was a polygamist. I believe he had lots of concubines and had these girls in a completely he exploited hundreds of girls in the spiritual wife system. Sarah Pratt talks about it too. There are so many independent witnesses in their own diaries of Joseph Smith's conduct that don't exonerate him. They convict him in the spiritual wife system. And according to Sarah Pratt, he only instituted this business about sealing for the chicks that he couldn't talk into bed with the Hosea chapter 3 doctrine. So I know that John thinks that Joseph Smith was a good guy and that sort of thing, and I don't agree.
I don't share that.
I don't agree. I do agree that Brigham Young probably ordered his murder and Hiram's and Samuel's through like Hosea Stout and those guys poisoning Samuel. Brigham Young, I think John's right on all of that stuff as far as Brigham Young being connected with Rothschild banking people. As a matter of fact, if you can find that, I think it was Heber J. Grant really got the church indebted to Union Bank of New York, which was Rockefeller held, when he wanted to corner the sugar industry. And then, there was economic problems, and so they went into default, it looked like, from what I've read, to Union Bank. So what did they do? Well, they probably bought shares of, the corporation of the first presidency. I can't prove that, but when you look at that, and then you see where, one of the Rothschilds actually joined the church a while back and so forth from like Austria. But another thing I learned was when I gained an understanding more of corporate governance through shareholder votes. And a preferred shareholder might have 30 votes per share, whereas a common shareholder might have 1. And these boards of directors are controlled by shareholding. And if you look and see, everything's privately owned that you think is public. A city, a state, a county, a pension fund like CalPERS in California. Every state, and they have these comprehensive annual financial reports. This isn't like some kind of theory. You can read them. Florida actually goes and denotes every single investor, and there's like 14 investment. There's like 14,000 investments they'll name, in whether it's Verizon, AT&T, Deutsche Bank, all over the world. And these guys are basically running privately held companies that govern us, and everything is commerce. When I discovered that America essentially was a British colony still, and it's all privately owned, then that blew up my thing of the Book of Mormon and the Manifest Destiny. I'm like, you know what? There wasn't any God freeing the Americans, because we're still not. We're all we're chattel property. I mean, the common way of getting married with a license. What's a license? A license is a temporary permit to do something that you don't have a right to do. You don't have that means you're a slave.
Right.
But they hide all these things, and the more you learn about how things really are, you find out you've just been bullshitted completely. So yeah, Joseph Smith, for instance, now you see on 3 Mormons, and they had what's his name from Book of Mormon Central, and they're going, well, look, this seer stone, it's kind of like this seer stone. You're just looking at it. It's just a tool to learn what's on these plates of gold that he apparently wasn't ever looking at that. They just bullshitted us with all these pictures of him looking at a plate. And when now they say they're going with, he was looking at a seer stone, which I think was complete bullshit. That was just what they marketed to the people at first. Then they go, this isn't going to work anymore. So they hid that shit in the first presidency vault. And then, it came out, and then everybody's like, say what? After South Park. But, this is my prop here, my Joseph Smith hat, Oh my God. Yeah.
I've got mine over there. Whenever I need a revelation, I stick my head in my hat.
Yeah, exactly. So
I'm
so
joking for all of those.
What they don't mention, of course, is that a seer stone has to be consecrated and set apart through witchcraft.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and you got to face the east and say these various spells to actually consecrate the thing. Seer stones are a thing. They are, but they must be consecrated through witchcraft. And if you learn the language of things, you notice words like dedicated, consecrated, mm-hmm. set apart. These words are the words you find in Freemasonry and witchcraft. And,
yes.
And then you're like, oh my God, where's all this shit coming from? And then you realize, he didn't just practice, and they try to make it, it's folk magic. The words are made, that's just no big thing. But no, he's practicing black magic. They were sacrificing like black goats, sheep, dogs, whatever, to these demons guarding this treasure. That's basically like voodoo. That's black magic in a circle. Yeah, I got this magic circle here, and they cut it with, they drew it with a magic knife, and they had the holiness to the Lord parchment. Where do you see that? Right on the temple, holiness to the Lord. That's the name of a magical parchment, and Joseph Smith had the Jupiter talisman to give him like power for riches and power over women and all this stuff.
Right.
And,
and that's one thing. You bring up a couple of really good points, and I've mentioned this in a few of my videos. It's so important to be symbol literate because you have to know what it is you're looking at. And word magic, I have yet to do a video on word magic. I've talked about it a few times, but people don't understand that the words that they're saying they create a spell, which is why we have to learn spelling.
I watched you actually say that. I hadn't thought spelling.
Mm-hmm. The spelling. And this is why we learn to write in cursive, and why they're not teaching it anymore is because our government documents for the Constitution, the Bill of Rights, are written in cursive. So if you can't read cursive, then you don't know what your rights are. But back to the word magic, they use, because each letter has a personality, a character, a trait, a frequency, mm-hmm. the way you put the words together. And we have dog Latin. We have a bastardized form of English or Latin that we're speaking. And so everything is inverted. When we think we're praying, we're actually not. When we think we're saying a blessing, we're actually not. And there's all kinds of examples that we could talk about, like good morning. I don't like to say good morning because to mourn is to grieve and to be sad. So enjoy your morning. Your grieving is what you're saying when you say good morning. So these are a couple of examples of word magic. And the church, the Masons, have implanted this and created the language this way so that we're casting spells, but we don't even know that. We're not aware of doing it consciously. It's unconscious word magic is what we're doing. But they know the esoteric magic. They know exactly what they're doing, and they're using it deliberately on us. We're at a supreme disadvantage by not knowing what's going on.
I agree with you. And you just actually, some of those things you just told me, I didn't know. What I did know, like the hint right there in Stairway to Heaven, that sometimes words have two meanings. Well, a lot of times they have two meanings, and when you know the language, the esoteric language and the language of witchcraft and the language of the law, of the maritime law, you realize you're actually abdicating rights. Like they say, they read you your rights, or they say something, they say, do you understand? Well, that means to stand under the bar and to agree to be to take your direction from the judge and that sort of a thing. So there's so many, all these maritime, to give birth, currency, all these things have to do with maritime, and you don't understand what you're saying. You don't know the law. And if you know the law, if you understand how things really work, and I'm not saying I really do, but I know, enough to know that there's a huge difference.
Right.
Like one good example. So everything is like is done for value. And so you get tricked into a lot of this stuff. Everything is commerce. The prisons are privately owned, the justice system, everybody's placed in, they have like Freemasons that are placed, and they're all occultists and so forth. And so you can't get this shit, you can't get justice really. In fact, I've been in a court where I said, well, what about the Constitution? The guy goes, I don't use the Constitution in my court. I'm like, what? Yeah. It's like
it's all commerce
in their own courts, because it's not the way you think that it is. You don't have these rights, especially if you're in the 50 states, because the Constitution was for the District of Columbia and the territories belonging to it, not for the 50 states.
Right, and the 10 square miles.
They just find out that they actually don't have any of these rights.
And that's why I say understand. If you go to my blog, my website, and you read the pieces, if I have to say understand, I don't say that. I say understand or overstand. But usually understand is what I go with, because I want it to come from within versus standing under, which I do not do. And I don't want people to get in the habit of doing that.
Yeah, exactly. So the more I learned of these things, the more I realized that our leaders were, because I thought Ezra Taft Benson, he's a great guy and stuff. And I've had these amazing meetings with people. I managed, did you ever hear of BFA, Benjamin Franklin Academy?
Yes.
Yeah, set up by Cleon Skousen's son-in-law and his daughter. Mm-hmm. And so, so I had 4 children go into that. And then the lady that was running the one, she bailed because the kids like overwhelmed her, Most of them were kids that were like problematic in the place where I was. They had difficulties, whether it was learning difficulties, emotional difficulties because of stuff at home and so forth. And so it was like, I said, okay, I'll take it over, for free, but at least my kids can go for free. And I was going to say, then this grandfather of this girl that was in it, and she was really good homeschooler, really smart and all this stuff. We had these talented people. But then there was a lot of kids that they were problematic, and their parents just go, what can we do with these kids, And this guy came in, and he was a friend of Ezra Taft Benson's. Mm-hmm. He just taught like for 2 straight days. It was like Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday from 8 until noon, right? And this guy just started with this story like from when you were in intelligence, and he just went through, and then he was talking about that he was sent by Ezra Taft Benson to be with Ronald Reagan as like a special advisor from the prophet and all this shit. And it was like, and I was like, he was trying to tell me Reagan was like a good guy, and I go, well, what? I said, George Bush was running it after he got shot. And he's, the Bushes are totally evil and all this shit. But he's like trying to tell me that Ronald Reagan was like some great guy, like they always say on TV and stuff. And I'm like, well, he was kind of at least an honorary Freemason, and he was like, with the Actors Guild. His wife was an occultist, and maybe he tried. I was going, I'm not buying all this stuff. And my grandfather, had Ezra Taft Benson came over to the house and that sort of a thing, because he was high up in a government position. My grandfather was, and I've run into guys like from maybe the World Bank and stuff on the shores of. Not in America, and had and had these conversations, and the guy's like, well, what do you think about the mortgage crisis, And he goes, so why did they let Lehman fall? So he's like, so if the Fed is doing all this shit, then I should be getting some of the money, He's like telling me how they manipulated the currencies here and there, and I looked him up later and saw that he's on all these NGOs, and he's with some huge pharmaceutical, concerns out of Europe, and this guy was big shit, And I'm like, why do I have these experiences, or an attorney for the Fed Bank, for the central bank of a Central American country, and he's telling me how they have lots of political parties in some of these places, and it's like all these guys, they act like they're enemies, but they're not. He goes, they all run companies together. He goes, I'm like an attorney for all these guys, and it's all bullshit when they're like fighting with each other on TV. He goes, they own all these companies together, and it's like, you're so USA centric by the way that things are presented on television, and you think, oh, God established the United States as the greatest country in the world, all that shit. But you go to any other country, they say pretty much the same kind of things. Like, we're super special, and God gave us our freedom from Spain or whoever the hell it is, you know? And you're like, you start recognizing the same pattern of mind control that's used to create patriotism so that people will go to war when you're told to. It's God, family, and country. It's your duty. You're standing up for your freedom and your rights and your religion. You're all, just like the Nephites did. And I'm like, wait a minute. In the Book of Mormon, it gives a clue, and it says when the Lamanites didn't want to go to war against the Nephites because they're like, they always beat the shit out of us, you know? Then it says what happens was they put Amalekites on the towers because they were like hardened in their hearts, right? And what the Amalekites did was be like Fox News or something, you know, and they're just like, we got to go to war, you know, these Nephites, they're bad and all this shit, until the mind of the people was, you know, until they used enough, you know, group mind control to get the people to go to war. And I go, that's the same damn thing that they do now. And you know who the Amalekites are? It's all the religious leaders. Mm-hmm. God wants you to be patriotic. And when your country says, when your president says, and they use all these titles, President Trump, President Obama, President Monson, your doctor, they use all of these authority titles and program people, especially Mormons, but of these other ones, you know, you got like Freemasons leading all these evangelists, what do we know, like Jimmy Swaggart, or Robert Schuller, Oral Roberts, you know, Bill
Goldstein.
Robertson. You look and most of them are like been Freemasons or other occultists, and even though they'll like talk shit about Freemasonry, you know, and you're like, and they're like, all these guys, they're all saying, be patriotic, do what your president says. Go to war. God wants you to do it. You're defending your freedom because you're the bastion of freedom for the whole world. And I go, these guys are all in bed with their brethren that are in the, you know, in all these other companies that are heads of them, and they put their guys there because the 185,000 corporations that are governments and municipalities in the United States block vote, control all this stuff. That's why you have the same politically correct messages being subliminally shown in all of these commercials. Doesn't matter if it's Nationwide Insurance or Chase Bank or whoever it is. They all show things that they want, you know, you to get used to see as normal that you didn't used to in their agenda. I'm like, how can they all have the same thing? It's because the boards of directors are all controlled by the same blockholding shareholders.
Yes, this is the new world order.
Huh?
It's the new world order. It's global, not just the new United States order. This is everybody. And they have
everything's compartmentalized
across the borders. So
countries are also individually, privately owned, just as the United States, which used to be the Virginia Company, is just as much a privately owned company as the IRS is, as the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints is, as is the Watchtower Bible and Tract Society, as are your privately owned prisons and all these agencies and all these stuff. They're all, the CIA, they're all privately owned. And even the Fed Bank, you know, where Ron Paul was going, audit the Fed. Well, guess what? They have a comprehensive annual financial report too. He was foolish. He knew he was just pretending. They already have that shit, you know?
Well, and I hope the viewers understand that in Black's Law Dictionary, and I'm not sure if it's volume 4, 5, or 6, but it says that a person is a corporation. We are seen as corporations and treated like that. That's why we have a birth certificate. That's why we have to have licenses and registrations to be able to move around and to be able to travel and to have operations and to bring in income. So everything is corporatized, period.
That's true. Corporations and trusts. It's like if you've ever seen the checks that are signed by a corporation, like for instance, the church, right? You got the bishop has like, you know, maybe he'll sign and then like one of his counselors or the financial clerk. It has to have 2 signatures, but below those signatures, it says authorized signer or authorized signer only. But if you take one of your checks, and I did this with 3 different banks, one of them was I think 2 of them were credit unions and one of them was Bank of America. And I took super powerful magnifying glass, and that line you're signing on isn't a line. It's microscopic print, and it says, guess what it says?
What?
Authorized signer only. because you're authorized to sign for the corporation that's represented in all caps as your name, but it's not you. And if you see it, that's what all of the checks have. You know, now you're getting to a cashless society, you don't see that so much, or check, you know, people don't use checks. But if you do that, yeah, I read it on every single check that I looked at, it would say those types of words: authorized signer only. You have to be authorized to sign for that corporation or that trust. Mm-hmm. You know, they're making it look to you like you're signing for you, but it isn't you. That's why it's in all caps.
Interesting. And I heard somebody, and this is years ago, so I might be getting this wrong. If anybody knows the correct information, please feel free to make a comment. We do welcome comments. Be polite, provide facts. That's it. But what they were saying was that anytime you sign within the square of the paper, the square, that is a contract. So the paper itself, by nature of it being the square, is a contract between the signers within that contract, the squared contract.
Okay, all right. I hadn't heard quite that, but I had seen about the securitizing of of those entities that we basically are the labor unit for, to pay back the debt to the Federal Reserve bankers. Because in 1933, I mean, you know, 20 years after that was instituted in 1913, the United States company went bankrupt to the Fed. So FDR and Mariner Eccles, who was head of the Fed, he was the second Fed chairman, and the Fed building, you know, there in DC is actually named after Mariner Eccles, who and the Eccles are to like the U of U, as the Marriotts are to BYU, and Eccles, they ran a lot of the banking in Utah until they merged with Wells Fargo during the financial crisis. So anyway, they robbed everybody of their gold. You get 10 years in prison if you even kept your gold. Since then, there have been additional bankruptcies, but that wasn't for gold anymore. You know, you see that it's wound up being basically the value of the work of the American people to pay back this artificially created money, not just that's printed, but when commercial banks issue a mortgage, for instance, or even a credit card, things, they're creating money out of nothing, digits, and then charging interest on top of something that they just created out of zip. And so I was like, these are prominent Mormons, you know, or you see prominent Mormons speaking at BYU that are involved. Can I tell you another quick story to you? Because I was going to talk about how CFR guys are speaking to BYU graduations, like Brent Scowcroft, who was Henry Kissinger's, you know, business partner, and also has Scowcroft Associates, and he was like an advisor to 5 presidents, right? And he said, like, we're trying to build a new world order 5 different times in his speech when he was introduced by Thomas Monson to the BYU graduating class at their ceremonies. And I'm like, why would they be having this guy like preach how they can help integrate us into the new world order at a BYU thing, you know? And so I was big, like in the John Birch Society, you know, trying to save America from the communists and then from the new world order, right? And so when I got into like the banking, you know, into the mortgage business, a popular way to market or leads I bought were spam. And so the head of the John Birch Society was coming to an area where I lived, to a hotel, to speak. So I went there and I met with him, and he was Mormon. His name was E. Vince Smith, and he was in the state presidency in Sacramento. And I'm like talking to him, like, why don't you guys like spam all this shit and send them to your website and wake up more people, you know? And he's acting like it's just a big game. And he goes, you know, we got general authorities there in the Council of Foreign Relations. It's like, it's all one big game and God doesn't give a shit. I'm like, what? You know? And that was one of my wake up things. I'm like, this is controlled opposition, and it's a Mormon state president who's part of it, and we got general authorities. And like, how could God, you know, give discernment to these people and have people that are basically working, you know?
And so he just flagrantly said this to you.
Got general authorities.
He just flagrantly said this to you.
Yes, he did. Yeah, I had a private conversation with him after he had this rah-rah, you know, this whatever he said in the meeting. I waited my turn, because people like to go up and they like to feel important because I talked to Robert Allen and he makes shitloads of money. Or I talked to, you know, whoever. And so, yeah, Vance Smith was the head of the John Birch Society at that point, and he was LDS and in a state presidency in Sacramento, he told me. So I just waited my turn, and then I talked to him. I go, this is a really good strategy. You can reach a lot of people. And he's like, nah. And then he's like telling me, wait, we got general authorities, and it's like, God doesn't give a shit. And I'm like, it's all going to turn out okay in the end. And I'm like, wait, the Book of Mormon says the exact opposite. It says you can't let these secret combinations get above you, which are built to compare and gain and enslave us all, and which would end up in our spiritual and physical destruction. That's what it says in Ether chapter 8. And I'm like, dude, you're just like completely opposite of what the scriptures are saying. And and if these brethren have discernment at the top, why are they doing this? And why are the apostles and why are so many people just basically like acting like Ezra Taft Benson was like, he's just some fanatic, right? And when he was talking about exactly what's in the scriptures, and then it's like all these other guys are like pro New World Order, and you see like Hinckley getting up there getting interviewed. I think I don't know if it was Mike Wallace or Larry King, and they're talking about, what do you think about Bill Clinton and shit, and he's like, he's a tremendously talented man. I just think it's too bad that he made a mistake. I'm like, too bad he made a mistake. The guy's like involved like importing all kinds of cocaine and murdering people and child slavery, sex slavery, and
pedophile,
and bitch and dutyist, and it's just too bad he couldn't control himself sexually well enough. I'm like, what kind of a prophet are you, dude? You're just covering for one of your brethren.
Mm-hmm.
So
when did you leave the church?
Together.
At what point did you leave the church and say, enough is enough? I have enough evidence to know these are not righteous men. I got to get myself out of here. When was that?
It was like I said, it was New Year's Eve of 2010. I was involved as an international concierge, and we had to go buy shopping for people and shit, and when they were like on vacation and shit, and they they'd like leave stuff, food, beer, whatever. And so I had all this beer, and I was like trading it to some German dude who made pizzas or jerky or whatever, some kind of stuff. And then I'm like, I stopped. I was going to go pay tithing one day, a few months before this, and I was going to walk down to the bank, get the ATM and bring cash to pay tithing. And I was like, you know what? I've been reading a lot of stuff, and I started going like on Mormon Think and stuff, and I'm like, there's no way. So I go, I'm holding out until I know for sure. So anyway, when it got to that day, there was beer at the house. I refrigerated some. I brought it out on the porch, by myself, and I still believed there was a God, and I cracked it open and I said, the church is not true, and this is my unbaptism, and I drank a beer. And I said, I'm done with this shit. And so that's kind of how it happened. And then I showed my wife, she saw me. I was like praying like all night that Moroni would come and tell me how Joseph Smith could, be a Freemason and everything's okay. Because I'm like, I'm not okay with just, even if I got some kind of a feeling, that's not going to be it. I need some explanation. And then I wouldn't get an answer, so I'd read more and more. And then I'm like, then I showed her the stuff on Joseph Smith stealing all these dudes' wives, and she had divorced her first husband because he was cheating on her, right? And so she's like, okay, we don't have to go to church, And
it was that simple for her.
It pretty much was, and she wasn't like a truth seeker. She was just like, I don't want to be involved in anything political. I just want to take care of the family. And she was like the hardest worker ever, but she wasn't like, and that and English wasn't her native language. And so like studying the scriptures was a bitch for her. Not only was it a second language, it's in, 1700 English, right? It's like, it was really difficult. And so she was like, let me do what I'm good at, And she was tremendously talented in a lot of things, but like reading the scriptures, she was like a temple worker as far as, she wasn't a veil worker, but she was like seeking revelation and stuff, trying to like help my daughter who had been raped. And she'd go to the temple and fast and like open the scriptures up to get a message from God to help my daughter. and she was like her secret sister and all this sort of thing. But she's like, I just knew, push that button, push the adultery button, because she was hurt by that. And I'm just like, she's going to pay attention to this. And she's like, okay, so Joseph Smith stole 12 dudes' wives, and he's like, he's got all these other ones and his spiritual wife sister. And she's like, that guy's an asshole. And then she's like, okay, but I can't deny the temple. I go, the temple shit came from Joseph Smith. And she's like, okay, well, I can't deny Heavenly Father and Jesus. And I'm like, I'll just let that one go at this point. But that's kind of how that went. And as a matter of fact, I don't know. I have had so many confirmatory or guided experiences. If you want me to, I could, people are always like, is she the one, is he the one, and that kind of thing in Mormonism, because like the whole added upon Saturday's warrior pre-existence thing. And I told you about that experience, with my first wife, who turned out to be like a maniac, and my second wife was really a really great person. But how I met her was like unbelievable stuff that happened.
Well, I was going to ask you, do you feel like your spirit grew, your connection to your spirituality grew after you left religion?
Well, I kind of, I don't think it's that simple.
I know, I'm simplifying it greatly.
You're making a really good point, though. Sometimes I say the words, religion destroys spirituality. Mm-hmm. Because these religions are basically ways of just controlling people, and governments have used them since the time, at least, of the Babylonians or the Sumerians, because what they do is that's your priest class, and they're right below basically your bloodline people. And what they do is what the Amalekites on the towers do, and they deify the leader, like they did in Babylon and in Egypt, and in the United States they deify the office of the president. They make that like they're all, the president. You must have respect for the president and all this stuff. They deify the office, not the individual. That way, when you've got those two parties, as soon as everybody noticed that this guy was full of shit, then they just go to the Democrats when it was a Republican, and vice versa. And so that way, it's so much more easy to control than a monarchy is, because when you got a monarchy, everybody's looking at the king and his bloodline, and they're like, this guy's full of shit. But when I'm
glad you mentioned that, because president is code for king, and the only people who can be the king or the queen are the bloodlines. But the only people holding the offices of president are bloodline individuals. So it's really the same thing. You have to think in terms of bloodline, not in terms of the language, because going back to what we were saying with the language, they use language to confound or confuse us. We know that from the scriptures, that's right? Mm-hmm. So you have to think in terms of bloodline. If I've said it once, I've said it 10,000 times. That's what it is. And you have to look at the bloodlines of these presidents that run the church.
Yeah. And I like for the president of the United States, there are people that have used genealogy to actually predict who would win an election based on the most blue blood or something like that. I can't.
And Hillary and Donald, they're 19th cousins through John of Gaunt. So because of their bloodline, to them, it really didn't matter who won, because they had the same birthright claim to the position of the throne, as it were, the throne being POTUS.
Exactly. So
blood-wise, it didn't matter.
Right. So the religions are basically have deified and created loyalty to the governing ones. That is the function of religion. That's the number one function. And then they use things like mind control, like faith. Mm-hmm. Yes. Marketed to us as a virtue. And what is faith? It's the ability to believe in bullshit that has no logical support. And the more far-fetched it is, the greater the virtue of your faith to believe this bullshit. And I'm like, what the heck? Can't people see through this shit?
See, I happen to think that faith is a dirtier word than fuck. That to me, because fuck is just an acronym for fornication under consent of the king. That's what that word means.
Is that really true?
That's true.
Wow.
It's true. It's not a swear word, and neither is shit, by the way. The only real swear word we have is damn. And that's usually in relationship to the soul. But what was I saying right before that?
Well, you said that the F-bomb was an acronym.
Oh, faith.
Under
Faith.
consent of the king. I had never heard that. Yeah,
Yes.
I heard some stuff from you in your videos. It's amazing.
Thank you. But faith to me is a dirtier word because that is actually programming you to not use logic, to not use fact, to just follow blindly to these individuals. Religion, religare, is a Latin word that means to bind. So religion is something you do. Spirituality is who you are. So when they're asking you to follow and be faithful, they're not providing any facts. They're not providing any evidence. They're just asking you to blindly follow the leader wherever he goes. And you don't know, because of his brethren affiliation with the Masons, where he's leading you. It's Luciferian. And so it really gets quite deep. What?
To bondage. You know that they're leading you to bondage.
Yes. Yeah.
The language and those principles, the more the more you study how mind control works, there's so many techniques that are used that are so powerful. One example would be association is huge. So they always associate you with something negative if they want to, discredit you in something positive. And so, like, when you're talking about the church, okay, let's say the gospel topics essays or something, LDS apologetics versus someone who's a non-believer. Well, if you look at the history of the church, the worst thing you can do is not to kill someone. It's to be an apostate, be a son of perdition. In other words, it's all about brand identity. Same that way in Christianity. It's about brand identity. So what they do is they present and they go, well, this is a faithful perspective. Someone believes in the brethren. So that sounds positive. It sounds like a faithful husband he's faithful. He's rare too, right? By the way. And then, and the opposite would be an unfaithful, apostate, a critic. There are always these negative associations. It's negative. You're being negative. You ever watch like Three Mormons? Oh, these negative comments. No, all they're doing is speaking truth, but then all they do is they just mock the people. And so faith, the whole principle and faithful, they use all this, maybe it's word magic, but it's the power of association that's built into these terms. Like, for instance, conspiracy theory. As soon as you say theory, you're just saying, well, it's just conjecture. So you're instantly casting doubt, and it's not like theory when you're looking at, comprehensive annual financial reports. That's not theory. That's fact, But the language is used with so much power to influence people by what they're conditioned to believe. And I just saw this more and more, and I said, our leaders are doing that, Our leaders are doing that. And then when you see them mocking somebody like Dieter Uchtdorf in conferences going, some people still believe that the earth is flat. And he goes, and there are people that think the moon is a hologram. And there are people that believe that there are aliens among us. He makes it sound crazier and crazier. And then he's like comparing them to people that don't have the faith to follow the brethren. And then you see like Dallin Oaks and him being quoted in the seminary teacher's manual. And I made this video especially for my son that I hadn't seen in a long time because of the story that I haven't told yet, and regarding seminary. And basically in there, he says, we don't, believe or have a testimony because of any set of facts. If you are faithful members of the church are able to pray and have the Spirit reveal to them the truth of the gospel. And basically the inference is, if you don't get the right answer, it's because you're not righteous enough. It's your fault. And that's pure mind control. And it's like every one of those essays, all they do is they lead you into oblivion. They say that they bullshit you and give you all this fluff, and they ignore the real the real items, you know. And then what they say is, so bottom line there, we just can't prove if the book of Abraham is true or false, so you have to pray about it, you know.
And have faith.
Yeah, and you have to have faith and pray about it. When it's like, okay, no, it's filled with linguistic and historical and religious anachronisms. I mean, it's so screwed up. I mean, Joseph Smith calls, you know, he starts off, he says, Abraham, my name is Jehovah. Abraham? At that point of the story, his name's Abram, not Abraham. Jehovah was invented by the freaking Catholic monk Raymond Martini in 1257 AD. There was no Jehovah. So there goes your whole temple thing. Jehovah didn't exist. The Church of the Devil monk invented the freaking name, you know, by taking parts of the title Elohim, meaning the gods, and Adonai, meaning my Lord, which the Jews substituted, you know, in their scriptures in Hebrew for the name, which is the Tetragrammaton, you know, which they try to pronounce Yahweh. And so it's like he creates a name out of two titles, 1,300 years, and it wasn't even, you know, then it was like, you know, Yehovah, because there wasn't a V or a J in English.
Right.
You know, the anglicized Latin turned in, you know, about 200 years later to Jehovah. And that's like, the Jehovah's Witnesses and the Mormons are just completely screwed by that, you know. And then you've got, like, it talks about referencing the Chaldeans. They weren't even there for 1,000 years. That's a fuck up in the Bible, excuse me. I try to keep it, you know, where Mormons can listen. And, you know, Pharaoh, you know, didn't mean what he said it meant. You know, the wife of Egyptus, which comes from Egypt, which means that which is forbidden. That's not what it means. And that's freaking Greek. And Greek didn't even exist at the time that Abraham's supposed to have lived. I mean, they got bullshit after bullshit. And then he's got this Egyptian language that he's translated, which is all bullshit, according to every Egyptologist.
100%.
What?
100%. He didn't get 1% right.
He didn't get one thing right. And you know what? Those hieroglyphs, he goes, this is what these hieroglyphs mean when he created that alphabet. One of them has got like 75 words describing one freaking hieroglyph. Are you kidding me? It's ridiculous. And then at the end, we were talking about this. That's like facsimile to figure 7. And Joseph Smith says the interpretation of this figure is it's Elohim, you know, sitting on his throne, talking to Abraham and the Holy Ghost, revealing the grand key words of the priesthood. The guy's got a boner and no pants on. That's a PPI I'm not going to. I'm like, you worship this dude? This is disgusting. I mean, unbelievable. That's God. Joseph Smith says that's God, and he's got his shorts off, and he's like, you know.
It's all about the phallic. It's really.
I'm like, how do you argue that? You worship this dude? Unbelievable. I'm not cool with this God. You can have it. I don't want it. I'm out of here. You know, I'm done. That's no priesthood interview for me. What if your bishop was sitting there like that with his shorts off and ready to go? I'm like, no. See ya.
I would imagine it's happened a time or two while he's had his interviews behind closed doors.
But God's doing it out in the open with two dudes, Abraham and the Holy Ghost, and he's just like proud of his obelisk. And I'm like, no, this is not okay. And it's right in your scriptures. Mm-hmm. It's smaller and kind of upside down in that circle. You read it. Joseph Smith says that's God the Father, and it's obscene. That's like the most disgusting thing I've ever seen, you know?
I remember staring at those depictions as a small child trying to entertain myself in sacrament meeting. And those types of things go straight into the subconscious. But I do have to get going. I've got a consultation that I'm doing in just a little bit. It is always fun to talk with you and illuminating, Dodger. Give us your parting words.
Okay, here's my parting thing. I was gonna like try to do a little showmanship and throw this thing in my hat. And I was gonna read this poem that came to me at like 4 o'clock in the morning on Halloween, not last, but the one before. I woke up and these words came to me. So you can say I channeled it or something, but I'll just pretend here. I'm gonna read it, okay? And I created this video And so the Statue of Liberty is on it, and Moroni, and the face of the Statue of Liberty in this is Melania. So I'm going to look into my hat here, and I'm just going to read it, okay? So the name of the video is called Mormonism's Babylonian Mystery School Roots and America's Manifest Destiny as the New Atlantis. There's a good talk about that sort of thing by Manly Palmer Hall, by the way. And so I was going to say, I see the Statue of Liberty. And so this is about the Statue of Liberty, okay?
Go.
It says, her unhallowed hand holding Lucifer's light, she stands in the bay as the queen of the night. A mother of gods from ages of old, in Columbia's hand the times are foretold. In liberty's name by Freemasons given, desolation she brings to all nations under heaven. She's Diana to some and Isis to others, a torch in her hand, and Lilith her mother. As Venus she rises in dawn's early light, or Atlantis she watches, her goal is in sight. An order of ages long lost in the past, its dawn she now heralds in triumph at last.
Did you write that?
Huh?
Did you write that?
Yeah, I did. It just came to me, and so I put it in, and I published that video Halloween, a year and like almost like 2 years ago, I guess, or a year ago. Yeah, Halloween, like 14 months ago.
Mm-hmm. That is really excellent. I would love a copy of that, actually, if you don't mind. But you know what?
It's in the description of that video.
Okay. And I need to
Google any of that, what I just said, you'll come up with that, or you have to go back there. You go back to like October of a year ago, and that's the video that's there. And it's also probably on the website, Mormon Truth Videos, Topics Hub, where everything's like goes by a category of the topics that we're discussing on Mormon Truth and Authority claims. So there's writing and appropriate videos for those topics, whether it's the restoration through the magic rock and all the other bullshit, and the priesthood that they backdated to 1829 when they got rid of the Book of Commandments and rewrote it and called it Doctrine and Covenants so they could have the priesthood that they invented in 1834. All that shit is like categorized so that I wanted people to have a video, library instead, not just written, because not everybody's going to read everything that's like on Mormon Think or some of these other ones, and so I incorporated both so that people you don't go, what video did I hear that on? Well, now you just have the appropriate videos per subject, and you can just veg, and don't have to read all that stuff, because a lot of people aren't going to read it.
That's true. And on my website, I have a whole ton of blogs, and then I have a bunch of videos. My YouTube, sometimes I put them up on my website, but they're usually different topics. So I don't always do a video on the blogs and vice versa. But I want to say something about Isis. You had mentioned that we are still worshiping Isis, who is represented via the moon, and including in our money. Now, if you look at the money sigil with the S, and then it has the two lines. When you elongate that, it spells out Isis. So money is Isis. We are paying tribute to her every time we use our money and we do a transaction.
There you go.
Yeah.
Okay, you talked about Amun Ra. What about top ramen? They just big Latin Amun Ra to ramen.
That's a good one.
You never know. But you see all these logos,
You should never eat it.
There's Isis Pharmaceutical. All these companies, there's so many of them, they got shit built into them, whether it's the 666 in Disney or the 666 and all CNI and TWC, Time Warner Cable, all these, there's so many of them. They just got all this stuff subliminally in it that if you recognize it, it's there. But you're just a paranoid, schizophrenic conspiracy theorist is what they want you to believe. So they don't want you to look. Because if you look carefully, you find out you've been bullshitted by these people.
Well, maybe we'll have to do a collaboration on symbols.
Yeah, we'll do some collaborations. Well, next I think we're going to have to do an intro of you to the people on my channel.
We can do that.
We can do that. But anyway, let's get to what you got to get to. And I'll check it out on one of my seer stones. I just don't know which one, to use. I mean, all these choices. It's all about choices and free agency, and I'm just overwhelmed.
I'm going to use this one.
Okay.
Okay, everybody.
Thanks.
Thank you for joining us today. Check out Dodger Game. He is a wealth of information. Not only that, provides great entertainment. I always have a good time when I'm talking with Dodger. You guys are fantastic. I want to thank the subscribers, both for my channel and for Dodger Game. I know he appreciates it when you drop by and make great comments. Be polite, provide facts. That's really all we ask. You can find me at galacticstoryteller.com. My Gmail is galacticstoryteller@gmail.com. I have had a couple of people ask how to make appointments. Go to my website and go to the calendar page. You can make an appointment there. You can contact me via email and go through my email to make an appointment. That's available as well. Like, subscribe, ding the little bell, do all those fun jazzy things, and we will see you in the next video. You guys stay vigilant.
Sounds